Do bosses like Michael Scott actually exist? And if you work Ed for one, what's your craziest story? I had a boss sneak up behind a middle-aged female employee and picked her up, then immediately drop her down saying, "I didn't think you weighed that much." He could not stop laughing. He was the principal. This occurred during passing period in a crowded middle school hallway. I had a boss once who spent all morning locked in his office. He asked me to come in after lunch where he showed me a handmade graph. He then proceeded to explain that this was a chart of all the sex he had ever had in his life. See, here it is blank until I joined the army. Then I went to a hooker here. Then they sent me to Vietnam where hookers only charged $2 per time. That's where you see the big jump. I was on 2 tours but then got shot in the face. I came back home and you see how it just drops to almost nothing. I was astounded. He wanted a pomegranate for lunch and they were out of season. But that didn't stop him from sending me on a quest to every grocery store in town in search of a pomegranate. Multiple produced guys laughed at me. But that was the easiest $13 HR I've ever made. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Rather than replying to each of you, I'll say it here: no, I did not find a pomegranate. And when I came back he was eating Subway and he seemed to have forgot he'd even sent me. Maybe I could have gone home or to the movies etc. But IDK. Driving around leisurely listening to the radio seemed like a pretty good alternative to doing my actual work at the time. I did in fact check the gas station in Carbondale. I had a redhead boss who made us all sit down and watch a training video about how we shouldn't refer to him as a ginger because it is bullying. No one had ever called him that. Had a boss who was very peculiar. For instance, he'd open a random closet, look at the stuff inside, then go on a tirade. Look at all this. Who bought all this crap? Semicolon up. You did. Oh. Well, somebody needs to throw it away. Constant stuff like this. I had a boss that used to watch me through a gap in the glass partition between our desks. She wanted to see if I was paying attention during meetings. One day, I put a large folder to cover the gap and she freaked. I still laugh when I think about it. Never have worked for one myself. But my dad told me a story about his boss who was giving out awards to everyone in honor of how long they've worked there. And he would give speeches for each person. A woman employee received her award and he gave a speech about the story of how she came to work there. And he said, "At first I didn't want to hire her because she was so hot. My dad's not working there anymore. But I love that story because I will never not picture Michael Scott giving Pam a Dundee and saying that about her." Edit. For all those asking, I am Big Tuna's distant cousin. Enlarged tuna fish. I once worked for a family company, not my family, where my boss often had loud fights with her husband, mother, and sister, an addict with a penchant for stealing, in the halls. I have a million wonderful stories about that workplace, but one that stuck out to me is this. Once for someone's birthday, she decided it would be fun to buy an anatomically correct male blow-up doll. She took this doll into the office, blew him up, and dressed him in a construction vest. The company was a contractor. When I walked by, my boss was trying to manipulate the position of the blow-up DCK, and asked me if I wanted to be the fluffer. My ass boss insisted his daughters be flower girls in my wedding. I declined. At the reception, he told me I was spending too much time talking to one person, and I need to work the room more. He held a meeting with our whole team less one person to discuss said person being gay. We all knew for well over a year, and never made a deal of it. So yes, they are out there and that is why the show is so funny to me. I can relate. I literally had a boss who would stop us in the middle of our work and hold company-wide meetings talking about 9/11 truther conspiracies and chemtrails. Mind you, we were furniture making company. He would get so caught up in his conspiracy theories that he forgot to order wood to make furniture 1 month. My brother had 2 bosses at his first job that I think fit this. It was an old married couple that owned the gym across the street from us. Probably in their 70s when he started working there. The wife was from Germany and super strict. The husband was clearly losing it. Some notable mentions are, when the husband combined bleach and ammonia to clean the hot tub and sauna room, tear gassing my brother in the process, wife insisted the street be swept once a week. This was my brother's task. Almost every single time, the husband would come out halfway through with a leaf blower and destroy any progress my brother had made. Husband would regularly sit in the sauna for way too long and have to be rescued by brother and co-workers. Brother opened every Saturday. They never gave him a key, so he would have to hop the fence to get in. Yet, I had organized a thoroughly awkward award ceremony once, that we never did again. Asked a Mexican employee if his new baby's name was going to be Nomas during the shower we threw for him. Heard me once use the phrase economy of scale, then used it wrong 5 minutes later in a conversation with different people. Didn't know the meaning behind Black Friday and what it meant for a company to be in the black. Just like Michael Scott, only more of a DCK. Long ago, my 80-year-old boss pulled me into his office. Paul, I've noticed that your shirts come untucked and that looks unprofessional. I'm sorry about that, Joel. I want you to start tucking your shirts into your underwear. Go ahead and try it now. Joel, you know I have 15 women who report to me. I can't undo my pants in the office. Sure you can. Drops pants. He is 80 and wearing Spider-Man underoos. This is also the story of how I went to work at Oak instead. I worked for a woman as her personal assistant cat sitter. She was super rich and off the deep end nuts. She had me order a mannequin online, and then paid me to take one of the mannequin legs to Nordstrom to try and see what suitcase I could buy that would fit the dismembered mannequin body. Because she wanted to fly with the mannequin to Pittsburgh to display as her daughter, dressed in her daughter's clothes, at that daughter's graduation celebration. Buying the mannequin was a whole thing too. She kept trying to get me to order from adult doll websites because she didn't get it. LMAO. My boss used to carry around a backpack full of hammers, and if you fell asleep at your desk he started banging a hammer on your desk until you woke up, and then he would autograph the hammer and give it to you as a gift. To be fair to your boss, is falling asleep at work common? Worked with a genuine Michael Scott, i.e., a nice, well-meaning person who just did some absurd things. We had kidnapping drills one day, where we learned how to not be kidnapped. Notably, this was a regular, boring office in a regular, boring suburb. No reason why kidnapping would be on anybody's radar. He and several of the guys randomly broke out into a push-up contest. Again, white-collar office, middle-aged dudes in khakis. Couldn't remember the nationality of our Hispanic colleague. Tried to learn Spanish to make her feel special when she returned from maternity leave. 1. What he learned was not Spanish. And 2. She was from Portugal. She knew like 5 words of Spanish. Disappeared for 4 days. No call, no email. Wouldn't respond to any of our attempts to reach him. Finally, someone drove out to his house to make sure he was alive. He'd just forgotten to tell us he was taking the week off, and then lost his phone in a lake. There were many moments like these. Great boss. Genuinely cared about everyone in the company. Occasional moments of brilliance, where he really got things done. But OMG, so many moments of ridiculousness. We had an anonymous feedback program at work, and our boss was livid with the results. Particularly with several comments that he frequently lost his temper in meetings and would yell at us. The more he talked about how incorrect and unfair and hurtful these comments were, the redder and angrier he got, until he finally pounded the table and shouted, "I do not scream in meetings, okay?" My mom's boss was the head manager at an office job in suburbia. Pretty similar number of employees and function to the office in the show. He was in his late 40s at the time and invited himself to my mom's birthday party at our house one year. Basically was just my siblings and a few family friends meeting up to play cornhole and chat for a couple hours. He showed up in pastel blue shorts, a pink polo, and flip-flops with a case of natural light. He got hammered by like 9 p.m. and started yelling at everyone. He saw a couple of our neighbors, younger guys, drinking next door and took the liberty to invite them over. Eventually he ended up in a wrestling match with one of the neighbors in the living room, which he finished by lifting the neighbor up in the air and body slamming him directly onto our coffee table. His final act of the evening was shitting his pants in the kitchen and passing out on the linoleum. While I never had a Michael Scott type boss, I did have a Ron Swanson type boss. He was completely no nonsense and humorless and seemed like a real hardass at times. He spoke exclusively in abrupt, clipped sentences or downright abstained from speaking. Once he left the store for the day, he was completely unreachable by phone or email, and any mail for him arrived at the store or at his P.O. box. The store was in a strip mall and I'd regularly arrive at work to see him doing repairs to the entire structure, repaving or filling potholes in the parking lot. When the store was robbed and he was tied up by the criminals, he tried to stop them and was shot in the head. Luckily for him, it was a BB gun. Unluckily for the robbers, it made him angry. He broke the chair he was tied to but also broke his collarbone doing so. Body checked one of the guys through a display case and then bit the other guy until he dropped the gun and they ran away. His name was Doug Lastner, and he was the best boss I ever had. Yes, they are everywhere. I've had a few. One would only approve your days off if you played into her ego. Her boring ass stories had to be the most fascinating thing you had ever heard. She would come into the office and spin around in a new outfit and we had to pretend it was amazing. I had to work every weekend for months until I started playing along. Oh yes. Some examples. Hope I can format it correctly. He called the UPS delivery man Marshawn every time because he was African American. His name was James. He dismissed my claims that one of our partners, sister company's CEO, was sexually harassing me because men say things like that and I should take it as a compliment. Would have the most useless meetings. Would bring pizza and beer for lunch and try and get us to stop and party with him even though we were slammed with deadlines. Our office was an open one so we would be at our desk and he'd be drinking at 2 p.m. playing music 3 feet away from us while we try and make phone calls. One day he came in said and called a meeting so one colleague put candy on the table and he stopped mid-sentence in his rant because he got distracted by the shiny wrappers. He would constantly make white knight decisions, even if that made work 10 times harder for us, and went directly against policy that he created. Yeah. And I worked for a church and he was the senior pastor. He had no filter and his own morality, which was questionable to everyone else. He'd say things to the secretary like, "I don't think you and your husband should be together in the upcoming pictorial directory photos since you guys are probably gonna get a divorce." She was fighting hard for her marriage. If he didn't get his way during a meeting, he'd go straight to the classic grandma Christian phrases like, "What's God gonna say when we get to heaven and we didn't let the charismatic church use our building for services?" They were known to do fake faith healings and things of that nature. He'd also put his hands on every young girl's shoulders and flirt with every granny. He himself was mid-40s. He got fired for cheating on his wife. Mine was less entertaining than Michael, but we often compared him for the following examples. Only hired people he would have a beer with, grossly underqualified to manage. But he was good at sales so got promoted, made really awkward, distasteful jokes, comments, e.g. asked an employee if he and his twin brother shared a girlfriend. Just really wasteful. Pointless meetings, nobody knew how he spent his days. His assistant manager did all the heavy lifting and he would wander around making conversations, literally showed up to a meeting with his superiors having done zero preparation and they kicked him out of the meeting. He actually got fired for calling COVID Kung Flu to a Chinese employee back in March. I think that would have to be the craziest. He had worked there for 8 years but had so many notes on his file. This was just the one that pushed it over the edge. I had a boss, and I am not kidding, it was like he watched The Office and took it for a real documentary and applied Michael Scott's management lessons accordingly. Not the craziest, but the best example of a daily interaction with him. He decided that the reason we were struggling to keep to time frames is because our checklist was not right. However, he has no experience in our field of work, so he did not know what was actually needed. The real issue was severe understaffing, but he got it in his head and there was no talking him out of it. So I redid the checklist to have the same layout. I just changed the order of the items. He didn't actually realize I changed the order. He just took one look and decided that no, it's not right. So I went back to the original version and put the check boxes on the left instead of the right. Literally all I did. Apparently it was perfect and we would see an improvement in our time frames because of his idea to fix the checklist. Man, I wish I could remember more, but I blocked most of it out. 1. Told us he invented Apple computers before Steve Jobs. That the computer he invented is still to this day more powerful than any other computer. 2. Threw knives in the air and said if you can catch them he'll give you money. This was apparently at a Christmas party. I wasn't there but believe it 100%. 3. Came to work wearing nothing but leopard print underwear and a pink cowboy hat. He's like 70. Dart. Unfortunately I was there for that one. 4. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but not the bad kind. The kind that makes you super smart. 5. Got drunk at work and gave alcohol to whoever would take it. He literally needs to be institutionalized, but he's rich so he gets away with everything and everyone is scared of him. Not sure how Michael Scottish this is, but I had a boss who was a complete duck up. She'd get caught messing up, blame me, yell and curse at me, realize later it was her fault, and then want to take me out for a private one-on-one lunch as an apology. After a while I just started telling her thanks, but I have plans already, because she was too tone deaf to realize that of course your employee doesn't want to spend their break eating with you, after you yelled and embarrassed them in front of their colleagues for no good reason. Edit. To the people who are telling me she's still a good boss because she apologized and wanted to give me free food. Did you see the part where I talked about the yelling and cursing? And trust me, there's plenty of other things this woman did that were not indicative of good leadership. Yes. He'd never admit it though. He swears he's a gym. Edited to add. Do I need to be liked? Absolutely not. I like to be liked. I enjoy being liked. I have to be liked. But it's not like a compulsive need to be liked. Like my need to be praised. Pretty sure this is the mantra my boss lives by. My boss is like Michael Scott in the bad ways. She thinks she's friends with everyone. She thinks she's really cool, but is super lame. She constantly distracts you from your work. She calls frequent meetings with no purpose or direction. I believe every manager in the world has had a Michael Scott David Brent moment. That is what makes it so hard to watch at times. I have had nights where I have often wondering how many I have had and how badly was I viewed as a result. And having to tell him 30 minutes later that he didn't have a job after all. Dreadful. I had a Latin teacher who, while wasn't exactly like him, gave some serious vibes. She was loud, obnoxious, and would do things like shouting the words she was teaching repeatedly, even when she was talking in English, or make sound effects in an attempt to be funny. It was very Michael-ish. Her crowning moment was when she randomly shouted at a kid who was right-wing leaning about how his political views were wrong in the middle of a lesson. I'm left-leaning, and happened to disagree with the dude pretty strongly, but he was a very nice guy and was just sitting there. It wasn't the place or time to talk about modern politics. Not to mention an extremely inappropriate thing for a teacher to say to a student in her class. Like, what the duck? A few highlights from my most Michael-esque boss. On multiple occasions, at least 3, he would run out of gas on the way to work. He would have to call in and let me know he was running late because he straight up ran out of gas. Another fun car fact was that his car got booted all the time. He was just constantly parking in restricted areas and would get either booted or towed on a fairly consistent basis. He routinely fell asleep at his desk, like, at least once a week during my 4-hour shift, and I only worked there 2 to 3 days a week. So presumably, it was happening constantly. Loan sharks would call his office phone constantly when he wasn't in the office. I was responsible for taking his calls, which made for some uncomfortable exchanges. Those sharks were persistent to say the least, and straight up told me on multiple occasions that they knew he was dodging their calls. Fun stuff. I had a boss that had many Michael Scott tendencies, but for some reason I cannot remember many of the specific situations. One that sticks out is, I had a 6x6 cubicle and he had the biggest office in the building. It was probably 15x20 and had all kinds of cabinets and storage. He walked up to my cubicle with a massive load of stuff from his office and plopped it on my desk and said, "Store this stuff here." I just looked at him dumbfounded and took me a while to respond. I eventually refused and told him I would help him find a place in his office. He was also very easy to get off task, and I remember us doing things like having arm wrestling matches in the middle of the workday. Nothing wrong with that, but it was just funny. He would sometimes hide around cubicle walls and scare the women in the office. It wasn't unusual to hear women scream at the top of their lungs throughout the day. Late to this party, I told him we were pregnant, but it was early and we weren't telling anyone we had had a few miscarriages. So he emailed the entire agency congratulating us. After the baby, my wife had a little belly. Nothing major, just a Pulp Fiction pot. A year or so after the baby was born, he congratulated her in the parking lot on being pregnant again. We were not. His wife was there and was mortified. A year later he congratulated me again, saying he saw my wife and when were we due. This was in front of all the ladies in the office. Again, we were not pregnant. I once made him cry BC. I told him a client didn't really like him and would rather deal with me. He had one of those yoga balls he would sit on instead of an office chair, and he would bounce up and down while taking to you. The list is exhaustive. This was at the height of the American office popularity, so it was downright amazing to see it represented so accurately on a week-to-week basis. As I'm reading these, I'm imagining Michael Scott actually being the one doing them to see how well they fit. Not Michael Scott, but I absolutely worked for Lumberg in college. One day I overslept and was late to work. I saved the voicemail from him for years. Yeah, this is, Jeff. And I was just wondering if you were going to make it into work soon. There's UHH people who UHH want to get in and UHH. Yeah. So anyway, if you could just head on in, that UHH would be great.